Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. Today, we continue our webinar series with the topic, Bringing Video Conferencing to the Huddle Space. I'm your host, Joe Walkna, and I'd like you to welcome our special guest and speaker today from Nemertes Research, Robin Gareiss. Robin is president and founder of Nemertes Research, where she oversees research product development, conducts primary research, and advises leading enterprises, vendors, and carriers. For over 25 years, Robin has advised hundreds of senior IT executives ranging in sizes from the Fortune 100 to the Fortune 2000, developing technology strategies and analyzing how they can transform their business. She's developed industry-leading interactive cost models for some of the world's largest enterprises and vendors. Ms. Gareiss leads Nemertes Digital Transformation Research. She also is widely recognized expert in the communications field with specialty areas in VoIP UC, collaboration, and managed hosted cloud communication services. She is a sought-after speaker at conferences and trade shows, serves on the University of Illinois Chicago of Media Advisory Council, and writes a blog for No Jitter, and currently makes her home in Illinois. And of course, you can follow Robin on Twitter at @rgareiss. That's at RGAREISS. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Robin Gareiss with Bringing Video Conferencing to the Huddle Space.
Well, great. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate the nice introduction, and welcome, everybody. Very happy to be here talking about this topic. We've done some interesting research in this space that I think you'll all enjoy. So let me get started. I'll start off with just a quick about Nemertes, and then go into some of the research findings that we have on Conference Room of the Future and what companies are doing there. Then we'll look specifically at some of the key considerations with Huddle Spaces and look at a TCO from a study that we did on Huddle Spaces. And then I'll just wrap up and take any questions. Okay, so very quickly, for those of you who don't know Nemertes, we are a global research and strategic consulting company. We focus on analyzing the business value of emerging technologies, so we spend a lot of time gathering operational and business metrics, and the goal with that data is to really help enterprise organizations with their digital transformation initiatives. So you can see on the left-hand side there the various topics that we cover. The research that we conduct is in the middle. The difference between benchmarks and surveys, and we often do those together, is that benchmarks are, more of a interviews and discussions with IT leaders and also business leaders, depending upon the topic. And then the surveys are where we kind of augment that research with, just electronic surveys of pre-qualified people, and do more there. So some of that data you'll see is kind of a combination of both. And then, of course, we're always keeping up on what the vendors and service providers are doing and what kind of products and services they're offering. And then finally, you can see the services that we provide as a company. One of the things that we do a lot is talk, like I'm doing here, sharing our research data. Aside from actually conducting the research and analyzing it, I really love doing that. I actually I really enjoy speaking about the data, speaking about the research and our findings. And my goal is always that at the end of a webinar like this, that you have some good, actionable data that will help you make better decisions in your own organization. So hopefully you'll get that today, and I will move on to achieve that goal. So starting with Conference Room of the Future, we see a lot of organizations these days focusing on conference room or meeting room of the future projects. Both names are used. And we did gather some data on that where we looked at how many organizations are actually engaging in these projects where they're, looking at how to improve and streamline their meeting or conference rooms. And you can see that about 16% actually have that happening now or are completed with it, but quite a few planning. This was research from mid-last year, so another 18% planning for 2018, another 15% planning for 2019, another 18% evaluating. So a lot of companies really kind of focusing in on this whole conference room of the future. And you can see another thing that they're looking at as they evaluate what they're doing in their meeting rooms is how much of their space is actually utilized. So trying to right-size that space. You can see on the chart on the right, based on the size of the company, it's anywhere from about 35 to 52% of their meeting space is utilized 8 hours a day. That is changing and growing And it also depends on whether those meeting rooms have video conferencing. Certainly where we see the meeting spaces with video conferencing, the rooms are utilized much more, particularly in organizations where there's a distributed workforce. So that's something that we see companies looking at. Do we have enough meeting rooms? Do we have the right meeting rooms? Do we have the right sizes of meeting rooms even? And do we have the right scheduling tools embedded in those meeting rooms? So if somebody schedules a meeting and then, decides to change the meeting, and maybe cancel it but not actually change it in the meeting tool, does that meeting time kind of go to waste? So that's when we look at this next slide that looks at sort of the meeting room utilization. So when we did this research, we had a group of the research participants that we put in a success group, and it was based on a variety of factors. Some of it was, I think there were 4 or 5 different data points. Self-rated success was one of them. They got a point structure for self-rated success, and of course that's, subjective. And so we did look at, more objective quantitative metrics too, such as productivity, by what percentage did productivity improve, cost savings, and so those who are in the success group were seeing some good productivity improvements. It was they had to have in the 10 to 20% range of productivity improvements, so many had more than that. And then they did see some cost savings as well in what they were doing, things like reduced travel because they were doing video conferencing would be one example of that. So you can see here that the biggest segment of that pie chart is 50 to 75% room utilization by about 43.5% of organizations. So, you can see that meeting room utilization certainly is doing okay, but it can improve, and that's one of the things that we're seeing companies look at when they engage in these projects, is just trying to figure out, okay, how can we improve this? What do our employees want? What do they not have? In some cases, like I said, if they don't have the video conferencing in the meeting room, well, they're just going to sit at their desktop and do a desktop video conference, for example. So that's in a lot of cases where huddle rooms can come in, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we are seeing organizations adding meeting rooms of all sizes. So the percentage of companies that are increasing their room deployments by the end of this year, you can see that about a quarter of companies are adding more small rooms, about 30% adding more mid-sized rooms, and another 36% adding large rooms. So there's definitely activity going on here this year where companies are, in fact, adding more meeting rooms. But in large part, when we look at these projects, there's a lot of augmentation going on, where they'll say, well, we have meeting rooms, but maybe we want to change the design, the furniture, the lighting. Maybe we want to take a larger conference room that's always underutilized and build a wall between it and put 2 conference rooms. So that's some of the things that we see happening in these strategies as well. So what's driving those increased deployments? I thought this chart was really interesting. It's really employee demand. Employees want more meeting rooms at locations, and especially in companies where you've got the open meeting spaces going on, no real offices. We're starting to see those companies say, okay, this is great, and we can all collaborate, and sometimes we can just put video in those spaces, and that is, maybe not specifically a meeting room, but it is a meeting space. So we're seeing some of that demand. And then in some cases with the open meeting concept, they want separate meeting rooms for video because maybe some of the background noise is too high. So it kind of, depends on the company. But there is definitely, employee demand, asking about these, getting more rooms, getting more functional rooms. Improving the ease of use is another area. So great, we've got meeting rooms, we've got meeting spaces, but if we've got kind of a hodgepodge of equipment in there and every meeting room is different, it's very, very difficult to use those meeting rooms. So they want newer meeting rooms that are much more functional. They take into account the users, challenges in getting video started. We've all been there and we've all, seen those problems. And then, of course, like I just talked about, refreshing meeting rooms. In some cases, it's a corporate mandate. They want to get more space for people to be getting together. And, of course, travel replacement, that's a very easy sell internally. If you can say, okay, we're going to save, and we typically see about 30% of our travel costs if we have the right type of meeting rooms in place. Now, of course, the big challenge is to actually say, okay, your travel budget is cut by 30%. I've seen this way too many times where companies will justify a new new set of meeting rooms. They'll invest a bunch of meeting rooms, and they say, okay, our expectation is this is going to cut travel costs by 25, 30%, whatever the number is, and then they don't pull back the travel budgets from the individual business units, and when they go back to check, if they've actually had success. Well, no, we didn't really see a decrease in budget. Well, because they didn't take the budget away, or maybe more typically is they saw less than they thought because, some people are just resistant to change, and they're just going to go take that business trip rather than, look at the success that they can have with a video-enabled meeting room. Okay. So let's look at specifically Huddle spaces, because this is certainly, we've seen larger and mid-sized meeting rooms for a number of years, but Huddle spaces is really an area of newness and change and growth in a lot of organizations. And a lot of companies are just really evaluating Huddle spaces and trying to figure out, okay, is this what we need in our company? So, they're basically defined rooms with walls or just open meeting spaces. So you can see in the screen on that picture, that would be more of like a room space. They've got a video on the wall, and there's other things going on in the background. The one that you're looking at, larger is more of a room, a room environment. Typically, it's 5 or fewer people per room or space. If you get much more in that, then you're kind of getting into that, mid-sized meeting room or even larger meeting room. There's definitely an increased interest in enabling huddle spaces with video. We're all so used to being in our personal lives and just, doing a quick video call, FaceTime, whatever your method is, and people want this in the workspace. And so you can think about a lot of scenarios where you'll just be sitting in somebody's office or sitting in a common area or sitting in a small meeting room and talking with a few of your colleagues about a project and how helpful it would be to be able to add in some remote colleagues to go over an idea, to talk in person, to talk to even a customer at some point. The external meetings are also very useful, and just really get that personal interaction. Maybe as part of the video, you're going to do some screen sharing as well, but that really does help make the meetings much, much better. I'll tell you, we very rarely at our company now do any calls without video. I mean, we pretty much are always on video, and it really does make the meetings more productive and just more personal. And then, of course, the last point is kind of what I've been talking about. It just enables that easy collaboration with remote teams. So one of the things, I know this chart's kind of an eyesore, but let me walk you through it. So one of the things we asked organizations is how important all these features are in their huddle rooms. The blue line is something they must have. High-speed network connectivity, high-quality sound, power accessibility. Some of those things are pretty logical. It's a must-have. In other cases, the gold is nice to have. And then in some, it's, we don't need it all, or it's just not applicable to us. But I want to just point your attention to high definition video conferencing. You can see the circle there and the arrow around it. If you combine both nice to have and must have, it's one of the top features that we see organizations wanting in their huddle spaces right now. And like I said, some of them are pretty straightforward, like sound and network connectivity. But, you can see that there's a lot of different capabilities that they want to have, a lot of different technologies they want in the meeting rooms and the huddle spaces, like wireless screen sharing and, access to a consistent set of collaboration tools company-wide that's on the same level as high-definition video conferencing, availability of digital whiteboards. So all those kind of come in to really show that there's a need for this collaboration in the huddle spaces. And then I think moving forward, if you move down that list, you're going to see some other areas of demand that I expect to increase in the sort of must-have, nice-to-have, and that's AI integration. So things like, when the host arrives, the bridge automatically opens maybe through facial recognition. They'll be able to see, when the actual host arrives, but also can be counting how many people are in the room. You can automate the files being uploaded for the meeting, just making that meeting start much more easy and seamless and on time. Even voice assist to begin and end meetings is another thing that helps. How oftentimes do we sit in meeting rooms and have to call in IT to get the video started, right? We want that all to be simplified and make it a lot easier for organizations to use video, because that's when you'll really start seeing all the benefits. Now, some of the key considerations that we found in our research is that you want to make sure that your meeting spaces are optimized. We found that 16% of organizations over-provision their huddle spaces, and 19% under-provision them, which doesn't help anybody. You don't want to have a huddle space where, there's there's maybe 5 or 6 chairs in the room. There's only 2 people in there. Likewise, you don't want to have a huddle space that has 5 chairs and there's 10 people crammed in the room. Things like AI can really help with this, to just automate that counting for you and seeing, okay, are these meeting rooms being optimized in the right way? And in fact, less than 50% of organizations accurately provision the number of huddle spaces that they have. So not so much, how big is the room and is it right to accommodate the number of people, but do we even have enough rooms? Do we have demand by looking at our calendar, planning tool? Do we have demand for, 25 huddle spaces, but we only have 10, or vice versa? Have we spent too much on huddle spaces, and we need to readjust there? A new room, on average, costs about $10,600 per space. So you want to really think through that, because it's not a small capital spend when they start adding up at different locations. I mentioned the AI benefit just now, but I think having the data on the number of rooms to optimize the space is really, really important, just to make sure you don't have too many people crammed in, you don't have wasted space, and of course, you've utilized the meetings efficiently. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where you might have scheduled a meeting and for whatever reason the meeting's canceled, but you don't update the schedule, and therefore that meeting room goes to waste. AI tools can be used to say, okay, wait a minute, it's 10 minutes into the meeting, nobody showed up, I'm going to open up this meeting space, so now maybe the remaining 45 minutes of the hour or the remaining half day that this room was scheduled, somebody else can use it and it's not wasted space. And we actually found that in our visual communications and collaboration study, a high success correlation in productivity gains and the ability to meet the collaboration needs of the business when you do optimize those spaces. So no big surprise there, but just we do have the data to back that up. In fact, when we look at productivity gains, first I would say that 77% of those who were in the research who identified gains said that they saw an overall productivity improvement it ranged from 5 to 20%. And you can see among those companies, like what kind of improvements did they see specifically? And this is not a 70% improvement. This is saying that 70% or 70.8% of companies saw an improved speed of whatever the identified business process they were doing on video, that they were able to see an improvement. About half of companies said they saw better customer engagement. About 43% saw shorter meetings or, shorter project times. We also see companies using this for faster onboarding of new hires by doing video conferencing and not having to wait for someone to travel to an office to do an interview. And then faster close of sales opportunities. Just seeing those spatial cues can kind of help to identify when there's a problem or an objection and resolve it and get those get those sales closed. Now, other considerations, I think, when you're looking at huddle spaces, screen integration. So some of the video vendors have partnerships with screen manufacturers, and they integrate the screen management with the video systems themselves. So you don't have 2 separate management systems. You don't have to, you basically have one control panel, that does everything. You don't have to have, again, like a hodgepodge of different equipment that you have to turn on separately. Being able to integrate all of that and adjust brightness and all that with one console is really, really helpful and certainly time-saving in getting the meetings up and running and making any changes as you go along. Another area of consideration is just the ease of use. When you think about your provider selection, what you're going to do, how can you make it as easy as possible for someone to use that video and someone to use those huddle spaces? We certainly see correlation, and I'll show you in the next slide, of using the same video vendor in all sizes of your meeting spaces. What that does is it really increases ease of use of video in those rooms because your employees are used to a consistent interface in a single management platform. They don't have to, been in many meetings where, which video system is this in this room? I don't remember. I don't know if I've been trained on how to start things here. If you have a consistent interface everywhere and it's simple and easy to start up, whether it's a huddle space or a meeting size room or classroom or a big boardroom, that's when you really start seeing all the pieces fall into place. The productivity increases, the increased collaboration, faster speeds on developing products, and so on. And as I mentioned, most organizations do, in fact, use the same provider for all rooms. Some have, and this question was really, do you have primarily the same provider for all rooms? And like you can see here, 85% do. There's certainly, even within that 85%, maybe a location here or there that might have a standalone system that doesn't mix or match, but for the most part, they have the same provider, and we definitely saw that in our success correlation. Those who are using the same provider for all rooms were almost 23% more successful in their collaboration initiatives than those who do not. Okay, so now let's look a little bit more deeply at Huddle Spaces and the options that we have today. So, basically when you think about Huddle Spaces, there's three different approaches you can take. You can look at having like an ad hoc laptop-controlled Huddle space. This is where, you're a participant, you're coming into the meeting room, you bring your own laptop, and you're going to connect to, an in-room camera and screen and speaker microphone, and it's kind of just, everyone does that. It's ad hoc. It's not a real integrated controlled system, and you can see some examples of providers there. And there could be, of course, different providers within those as well. You can have a single vendor system where the software and hardware is all from the same vendor. It typically is going to include an integrated camera, an audio device, screen, your control pad, everything in there. all sort of integrated. And you can see some of the examples of companies that do that. Cisco has a couple of versions, High Five, Life Size. And then a multi-vendor system, which we see organizations doing too, and that's kind of what I've alluded to a few times in the whole hodgepodge environment where you have software and hardware. It's mixed from different vendors. It could be a variety of different cameras, controllers, PCs, audio devices. You can see, some companies and examples there that have pulled those together into a package, but you still have hardware and software from different providers. You still have a little bit more of a learning curve there when you use those types of options. So, you can see different ways of going about Huddle Spaces. So what we did is we conducted a research project where we looked at data from about 100 organizations of those who are using or planning to deploy video specifically in Huddle Spaces. And we conducted this just last fall. And it was mostly large organizations, just to give you an idea of the DNA of the people who participated or the companies that participated. So capital costs would include, your camera, your codec, screens, audio devices, controllers, licenses, any other hardware. Implementation is going to look at the staff time and third-party like integrators that you might use, and we take that, and what it's going to cost per room. And then operational costs, that includes your annual staff time, any annual equipment maintenance that you're paying or third-party managed services, and then any training for IT or users to use or manage the equipment. And so these are all annual costs, capital implementation and operational costs for the three different options that we looked at there. So you can see just in looking at this, the 5-year TCO is going to be best with the single provider. It's about 10% lower than the next best option. Capital cost, as we saw in our research, are lowest with ad hoc, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then you can see implementation. You're going to have less of a challenging implementation when you're using everything integrated from the same provider. And then same thing operationally. And to me, whenever I'm doing TCO analysis, the operational cost is the most important because that's what's going to follow you. Capital goes away, implementation goes away after the room's done, but operational costs are going to follow you year after year after year. And we typically see them dropping year over year as companies become more familiar and operate things more smoothly. But this is what we saw in the research. So, operational cost to me is the most important. Now, since we conducted, the study, I know Cisco introduced the Webex Room Mini Kit. Room Kit Mini. Got that backwards. And the pricing on that isn't reflected in here. They're charging just under $3,000 street price. I think it's about 28 something street price on that. So if you consider that in here, it would certainly reduce the TCO even further if that were what you were paying in capital. That would drive down the 5-year TCO for the single provider, in that case, to $17,700 roughly, and that would be about a 29% 5-year TCO savings versus, say, multi-year or multi-provider rather. So those are just some footnotes on the study, but I wanted to make sure I pointed that out as we were walking through this. Okay, so just to wrap up, I would recommend that you incorporate that huddle room planning into your overall video conferencing strategy. So don't just look at the large rooms and the mid-sized rooms. Think about how your employees are working now, how often they're getting into these small group huddles, basically, to make some really important decisions or really move projects along more quickly, or customer interactions and so on. Evaluate those single vendor solutions, because they're going to integrate the hardware, software, provide the consistent user interface and user experience, and then also give you the lowest TCO based on our research. And this is all independently gathered research. And consider solutions that do provide metrics to optimize your meeting space planning. I think that's really, really important. I really focus a lot on user experience and adoption and training employees to use technologies and being able to document success. If you don't have solutions that can show you what your metrics are and how well optimized your meeting space is, it's very difficult to prove success. It's very difficult to get that additional budget to do more projects. And then, of course, assess some of the advanced features that vendors are either offering today or planning. Look at the roadmap. Codecs that integrate with display screens to enable things like auto configuration, maybe some centralized management, or even auto optimization of displays based on whatever the input format is. Those are all things that you want to make sure you're looking at as you're selecting your vendors. So with that, I thank you very much, and I will be happy to take any questions, Joe.
Yeah, hey, Robin. We got a couple that popped in here. So the first one was, hey, what else besides cost should we keep in mind when selecting a video conferencing solution for huddle spaces?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, obviously with anything, cost is one component, but not the only component. I would say, first of all, when you're looking at cost, look at value too. Don't just look at the dollars and cents. Look at what kind of value you're getting. So there may be times where, you might be looking at, okay, do I spend less up front, or do I do something different, that might not provide as much value, but the dollars and cents look lower. I always recommend that with any technology deployment. Look at the value you're getting from what you're doing. I would say other factors that I look at, ease of use for both users and the IT staff supporting the technology. So if it's not easy for the users to use, and I would almost run some, tests on that. Have the vendor bring in the equipment, have them set up a room, and bring some employees in who have no idea, have never been trained on it. See how easy it is for them to get a video up and running, and that's going to help you to understand how much the technology is going to be adopted. None of us want to roll out technology that nobody uses. That's awful. It's a waste of money, and it's also a waste of opportunity, because that people are going to be more productive, more efficient collaboration, better meetings if they're using video, and particularly in these huddle spaces. I would say you probably do want consistency across your different meeting rooms, because, just because you're in a huddle space today doesn't mean you're not going to be leading a meeting in a conference room or classroom setting tomorrow. So you want to make sure that everything's consistent. Your dashboard, your interface is consistent. You don't have to think about how to start that meeting. I think, probably the other thing I would look at, I'm sure there's lots of things I'd look at, but the other thing that comes to mind is just looking at the provider's roadmap and their history. So how long have they been doing this? What are their customers saying? What are their references saying? But also, what are they doing moving forward? What's your strategy moving forward for things like automation and AI, and adding that into as much as you can with your technology, and maybe look at that as well. So those are some of the things I can think of.
Well, you answered the second one that popped in there too, when you were talking about some of the other experience of the huddle spaces outside. So you mentioned like larger rooms, classrooms, and stuff like that. So that's good. So a question one that was just popped in, what size meeting do you think has the biggest need, have you found in some of your research? I know you mentioned huddle spaces are typically for people, under 5, but is there a type of, a typical size of the meeting that you're seeing that has a more and more greater demand in your research?
It depends. I know that's a terrible answer, but let me explain what I mean. If it's a company that is very distributed, has a lot of offices and a lot of smaller offices, and also is doing really adopting the concept of open workspaces, I think in those scenarios you really are seeing a lot of demand for huddle spaces for sure. I think in other companies, well, it depends. This is a hard answer. I see Huddle spaces kind of as the biggest demand for another reason, though, too, because we don't have a lot of them. You know, for years, companies have been building and developing their large meeting spaces, and they have those in place, but they haven't been, paying much attention to their Huddle spaces. So I think because they have been kind of neglected for so many years, you do see a demand for that in order to get people meeting together. Some might argue, well, okay, if I only have 3 people together, why don't we all just sit on our laptops together? Well, because you don't have that, that Huddle space. You're not leaning over a table looking at things together. If you can do that and then also bring in people who are also huddling in another area, that does help. I will say that in other meeting spaces like the larger rooms or the mid-sized rooms, I think most companies are pretty well set there, but the big thing we see there is just getting things upgraded and more consistent, making sure that the sound quality is good, making sure that I can access a consistent set of collaboration features while I'm in those rooms, and that type of thing. So hopefully that helps.
It does. Another gentleman made just a comment about how much does lighting affect some of the Huddle spaces and some of the rooms when you're planning some of this video conferencing?
We see it as a consideration for sure. It depends on the people who are doing the rollout. If it's someone who's more in the AV space, they tend to care more about lighting initially when they're doing the rollout, and they pay attention to that and they do a good job on that. If it's somebody who doesn't have that, like those AV skills, I don't think they pay attention, or at least not enough attention to it when they're doing the initial rollout. And then when they start doing their testing, they're like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't look real good. Everyone looks kind of dark and they look kind of gray. So we need to, address some lighting issues. I think that is something that companies really need to be talking to their providers about, So they're the ones who have the expertise in the video field. Talk to them about it. Okay, what do I need to do with lighting here? And give me some recommendations so I know what to do. I mean, it's certainly something that comes up in our priorities when we look at, meeting rooms and what companies are doing. But I just, from my own experience, I see that some companies, unless they don't have that individual who's doing it, has a good eye for lighting, they may not be thinking of it. So I think that's something that, you really want to depend on your provider or your maybe an integrator who's doing the installation for you, ask them about.
Okay. Hey, so we had one more question that kind of popped in, and it's kind of particular to Huddle spaces and trends. So obviously we've been talking about Huddle spaces being a recent trend and how people are planning some of their spaces and stuff like that. Do you see that changing going in the future? And what trends should we expect going forward, maybe 1, 3, 5 years down the road? If Huddle is the new thing today, where do you see that going? Yeah.
I think a lot of that's going to depend on how the workplace itself changes. So if we start seeing that the open, Huddle spaces, they're just not working, there's too much noise, I think we'll end up seeing some more walls being built and the open workspace isn't going to work as well. But then, you've also got companies dealing with some white noise and sound that have been helping that. So I don't see that yet as a huge problem, but I'm just, projecting that maybe at some point it could be. I would just say, probably moving forward, there's going to be more automation in Huddle spaces. So again, just being able to say, okay, we're sitting, the 3 of us or 4 of us are sitting here talking like, hey, let's loop in John to this call. And it's just a voice assist. Maybe you've got an Alexa device in there or something that says, hey, start video with, John Smith, and the video starts. So a lot more automation so people don't even have to think about getting the technology started. I think we'll see more of that. I think there's just going to be more higher expectations all around with video. It's just become so much a part of everyone's life. One of my daughters is 19 and in college, and every call she makes is a FaceTime call. It's just they don't even use audio anymore. They always want to see each other, even though they're walking and holding the phone down and seeing each other's chins. It doesn't matter. That's just what they do. And I think that is going to extend into the workforce for sure. And there's just going to be this expectation that I see who I'm talking to. And also that the quality is going to be decent too. And I see that fading as a concern. I think the quality has gotten so much better. And the other thing I would say is expanding the expectation of video to outsiders. So it's not just my internal people that I'm talking to while I'm in this Huddle space. It's customers, it's business partners, it's people outside the company. I've seen that just mushroom in the last 12 to 18 months, and you probably have too. Pretty much every call I'm on, I'm never on an audio call anymore. It's always video. And, we talk to a lot of people in a lot of different industries, and the expectation is pretty much everyone's going to be on video. I think the other thing, people have to just get over how they look on video. I've definitely gotten over that. A lot of people for a long time would go on video, I look terrible today. Well, yeah. Everyone's just kind of gotten over that.
That's very true.
So those are some of the things,
hey, Robin, I was going to wrap it up, but one more just popped in about surrounding noises and huddle spaces. And is that a concern, and how do you kind of manage that whole thing? If huddle spaces are kind of in open areas, how do you kind of navigate those challenges with, surrounding noises and just stuff around you? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, and it is a challenge. I think it's where you place the huddle spaces is something that you have to talk to sound engineers about to see, how the sound is moving. We certainly see people putting the sound panels on ceilings and walls. We see organizations injecting white noise as kind of a barrier around a huddle space so that you're not hearing that noise. Some of it is just behavior of people. I mean, you're in an open workspace. Don't be yelling and shouting. Don't be shouting across the room. So some of it's that. But just a lot of it's just placement. So, we're sitting where we have all of our, coffee and snacks. Don't put a video screen there because everyone's going to be talking there, So a lot of it's trying to, just really, really think about where you're putting it. But if you do have to put it somewhere and for some reason it's louder there, you can do a lot with white noise and just, drowning things out. And if none of that works, it's rare, but I have seen some companies literally put up walls and say, okay, we need this huddle space here, but we're going to put up, and it's usually glass walls, but, with some sound barrier in there, it does help.
Understood. Well, I think that kind of does it. Robin, I want to say thank you very much. I want to say, obviously, on behalf of Robin, and the entire Cisco team, I want to thank you for presenting today. I want to thank everyone that joined for their attendance and their participation and all the questions. Thank you very much. To quick wrap up, watch your inbox in the coming days for a complete recap email, which is going to include a link to the recording as well as Robin's slides and any more information that we need to get to that we didn't touch on today with questions and things like that. So really, I want to say thanks again, everybody, for joining. I want to say thanks again to Robin for coming in today. It was much appreciated. And I think that concludes it. And thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.